The Commonwealth of Massachusetts versus Lizzie A. Borden, a dramatic reading of the full trial transcript. Day 5, Friday, June 9, 1893, New Bedford, Massachusetts. Chief Justice Mason and Justices Blodgett and Dewey presided. The state was represented by the Honorable Hosea M. Knowlton and William H. Moody, Esquire. The defense was represented by the Honorable George D. Robinson, the Honorable Andrew J. Jennings, and Melvin O. Adams, Esquire. Part 2. Redirect examination of Assistant Marshal Fleet by Mr. Moody of the prosecution.
You told us when you first went in and passed through the sitting room into the front hall and tried the door, you found it locked. I wish you would describe how it was locked at that time.
I don't think I testified in that way.
What did you say about the front door being locked?
Not at that time. I did not examine the door.
When did you examine the door?
After I came downstairs.
After you came down.
From Lizzie's room, the first time.
The first interview.
The first time.
So that you first passed the front door, went to her room, and then returned and then examined the door.
Yes, sir.
Now will you state how it was locked?
Well, it was bolted and locked. That is about all I can say about it.
What was there in the claw hammer hatchet which led you to separate it from the others? What were the appearances that led you to separate it from the others?
It had apparently been washed.
Yes.
And wiped.
Yes.
And looked damp and bluer than it looks now. That is, more blue, it seemed to me.
Yes.
And there was a spot of rust upon it which was very red. To me it looked as if it might be blood at that time, and also a spot upon the handle, a stain upon the handle which looked like blood.
Did you show it to Dr. Dolan, the medical examiner, at that time?
Yes, sir.
At the preliminary hearing, were you asked questions by counsel as you are here?
By Mr. Adams.
And by Mr. Knowlton?
By Mr. Knowlton.
Did you testify in any other way than to reply to such questions as were asked of you by the respective counsel? Did you do anything except answer questions, in other words?
Yes, sir.
What did you do?
Mr. Knowlton told me to state just what I did, and I went through with my statement as I recollected it.
Recross-examination of Assistant Marshal Fleet by Mr. Robinson of the defense.
On that last question, after you had given your testimony over there at the district court in the way that I have read it to you, and the other also, didn't Mr. Knowlton ask you, as the last question, this: is there any other fact, Mr. Fleet, that I have not asked you with relation to this matter? And didn't you say, not that I can think of?
It might have been so, yes, sir.
That is so, isn't it?
Oh, yes. He asked questions other than my making a statement.
And he gave you an opportunity to state anything else that you recollected. You understood it so?
Yes.
How was the front door locked at the time you tried it?
The bolt and lock.
And 2 locks?
I wouldn't say whether there was 2 or 1.
Well, do you recollect that the bolt was slid, or did you simply find it out by trying the knob to open the door?
No, it was bolted.
You recollect that as an independent observation?
Yes.
But you did not observe whether the lower key under the knob was turned or not?
I did not notice that the key was turned, you say?
Yes. Did you or did you not?
I noticed that it was bolted.
You remember that there was a spring lock or latch lock on there?
Yes, sir.
And also, was there not another lock just below the knob, the ordinary door lock?
Yes.
Did you try that to see whether that was locked or not?
The spring lock was locked and it was bolted. Whether the other one was locked or not, I don't recollect. There was 3.
Whether you found out about the locking by trying the knob? I think you said you looked directly at the bolt. Is that so?
The bolt. It was bolted.
Well, leave it right there. And I think you did not answer my question whether you testified about this bolting of the front door at the prior hearing.
I don't know whether I did or not.
Mr. Robinson completes the recross-examination of Assistant Marshal Fleet. Assistant Marshal John Fleet is excused. The prosecution calls its next witness, Captain Phillip Harrington. Captain Harrington is sworn in and takes the witness stand. Direct examination of Captain Harrington by Mr. Moody of the prosecution.
Your name is Philip Harrington.
Yes, sir.
You are on the police force of Fall River.
Yes, sir.
How long have you been upon the force, Mr. Harrington?
10 years last March.
Do you hold any rank in it now?
Captain, sir.
What was your position in August of last year?
Patrolman.
On the 4th day of August of last year, was your attention called to anything on 2nd Street at that time?
It was, sir.
Where were you?
I was at dinner. I'd just finished dinner.
What was your dinner hour that day?
From 11:30 to 1:45.
That is the time you were absent from duty.
Yes, sir.
Of course, you had to go at 11:30 to your house?
Yes, sir, that was the regular time to leave my route.
Can you tell me about what time it was when your attention was called to the trouble on 2nd Street?
Yeah, about 12 o'clock.
By whom was it called?
A young man named Turner.
After that, what did you do?
I immediately put on my coat and hat and took a horse car.
How far by horse car, or how long by horse car, if I may put it that way, were you from 2nd Street?
Well, I should judge it a little over half a mile.
Do you know what time you got there?
Between 15 minutes and 20 minutes past 12.
Is that by your judgment, or did you consult a timepiece?
Judgment. I was led to think so by the time the car arrived at City Hall.
What time did the car arrive at City Hall?
It was what was known as the 12:15 car.
To arrive there?
Yes, sir.
On arriving there, you walked, I suppose, from there to the Borden house.
I did not go to the City Hall. I stopped at the corner of 2nd and Rodman Streets and walked down 2nd to the house.
That is about how far?
Perhaps 250 or 300 feet.
When you got there, had any crowd collected about the premises?
Yes, sir.
Where did you go first?
I went in the front gate, walked along the yard front of the house to the north side, along the north side to the north door on the side.
Whom did you see at the north door?
Mr. Sawyer.
Did you go into the house?
Yes, sir. I went into the house.
Before going anywhere else?
Yes, sir.
Whom did you see in the house on the ground floor?
I saw Officer Devine.
I do not care to go into all the officers. Was Miss Lizzie Borden there?
No, sir.
Did you see any of the ladies there?
I saw several ladies there. I did not know who they were.
Whom did you not know?
No, I did not know them.
And there were some officers there. I don't care for their names.
Yes, sir.
Where did you go after you first entered the house?
I asked a question or two, and I was directed to a door on the west side of the kitchen. It was closed. I opened it, went into a room which was called the sitting room.
Yes, and you discovered Mr. Borden's body there.
Yes, sir. On a sofa which rested on the north side of the house was the form of a man, partially covered with a sheet, going from the head, the west end of the lounge, down a little below the knees. Below that, black pants and a pair of laced shoes.
Did you do anything or simply see the body covered with the sheet?
I raised the sheet from the face and looked at it.
From the appearance, could you recognize the person who was there?
I could not, sir.
You had known Mr. Borden?
Yes, sir.
How long?
Well, I had known Mr. Borden for 20 or 25 years. I had worked for him for over 3 years at one time.
Can you give any further description about the part of Mr. Borden's body which had been wounded and the blood which was about it?
The face was all cut and covered with blood. The clothes were stained, the shirt front and part of the coat.
Did you notice anything with reference to the condition of the blood? If you did, tell us.
Yes, sir. There was some of it very dark, as though it was from the veins, and there was more of it very bright, of an artery hue.
At that time, can you tell us anything with reference to its thickness? Did you observe anything?
Yes, sir. It was quite fresh, and as I stood there, or just as I got there and took the sheet, there was a small drop trickled down the side of his face.
Did you notice anything else with reference to the body or its temperature?
No, sir. I didn't touch the body.
Is there anything else that occurred in that room before you left it?
There were one or two persons came in and stood by me. Who they were, I don't know.
Then, where did you go?
I asked a question in regard to the other murder, and they told me she was upstairs.
Then you went up.
I went out the front hall, up the stairs, and as I got partway up, I looked toward a door on the north side of the hall. On the far side of the room, under the bed, I saw the form of a woman. I went up and entered the room.
Describe a little more particularly where you were when you first saw the form of the woman.
Well, I should say I was about midway on the stairs.
And your head was where with reference to the hall floor?
Just above the floor, sir.
Was there any difficulty to seeing the body?
No, sir.
Then where did you go?
I went upstairs along the hall into the room, around the foot of the bed. and I stood a short distance from her body and looked at her.
Did you notice anything? If you did, you can state it.
I noticed that the head had been cut, and there was blood around the floor. Blood on the back of the dress, and there was blood on the pillow sham nearest to her, and some on the spread.
Did you notice anything with reference to the condition of the blood on or about Mrs. Borden's head?
Nothing more, sir, than it was quite dark.
Thence where did you go?
I then turned around to come out, and on the threshold of the door stood Officers Cogswell and Riley. I stepped into the hall, turned towards these to go to the head of the stairs, and as I did so, the door on the east end of the hall was ajar. In that room, I saw Miss Borden and Miss Russell.
That was Miss Lizzie Borden, of course, you mean?
Yes, sir.
Well, proceed then.
I stepped into the room, and taking the door in my right hand, I passed it back. Miss Russell stood on my left, and she received the door and closed it.
Did you have some conversation with Miss Lizzie Borden?
Yes, sir.
Was there anyone else except Miss Russell and Miss Borden there at that time?
No, sir, not outside of myself.
Where were they?
Miss Russell stood in front of a chair, which was at the north side of the door, which I entered. Miss Lizzie Borden stood at the foot of the bed, which ran diagonally across the room. That is, the head of the bed was up in the northeast corner, forming a triangle with the north and east sides of the wall. She stood at the foot of the bed on the north side.
Did you have some conversations with her?
Oh, yes, sir. I told her I would like to have her tell me all she knew about this matter.
Will you state what she said and what you said?
She said, I can tell you nothing about it. I asked her when she saw her father last, and she said that when he returned from the post office with a small package in his hand and some mail. I asked him if he had any for me, and he said no. He then sat down to read the paper, and I went out into the barn. I remained there 20 minutes. I returned and found him dead.
You may proceed with anything you said and she said. Give the whole conversation.
I then asked her, when going to or coming from the barn, did you see anybody in or around the yard or anybody going up or down the street? She said, no, sir. While in the barn, did you hear any noise in or around the yard as of anybody walking there? She said, no, sir. I said, not even the opening or closing of the screen door. Why not? You were but a short distance and you would have heard the noise if any was made.
What did she say?
She said, I was up in the loft.
Is there anything else that occurs to you that she said at that time?
Yes, sir. I then said, what motive? And she said, I don't know. Was it robbery? I think not, for everything appears all right, even to the watch in his pocket and the ring on his finger.
That was her answer or your question?
Her answer, sir.
Do you recall anything else that was said at that time?
I then asked her about the rest of the house, and she said everything appeared all right.
Was there any more talk about the time she was up in the barn?
Later on, sir.
Well, then proceed in your own way and tell the whole conversation without further questioning.
I then asked her if she had any reason to suspect anybody, no matter how slight. I said, no matter how insignificant it may be of great moment to the police, and be of much assistance to them ferreting out the criminal. And she said, no, I have not. Said I, why hesitate? Well, she said, a few weeks ago, Father had angry words with a man about something. What was it? I don't know, but they were very angry at the time, and the stranger went away. Did you see him at all? No, sir. They were in another room, but from the tone of their voices, I knew everything wasn't pleasant between them. Did you hear your father say anything about him? No, sir. About 2 weeks ago, he came again. They had a very animated conversation during which they got angry again, and I heard Father say, no, sir, I will not let my store for any such business. But before they separated, I heard Father say, when you are in town, come again. I will let you know about it.
Anything else that you recall?
About here, I cautioned her then of what she might say at the present time.
Give us the words rather than the caution.
I said, owing to the atrociousness of this crime, perhaps you are not in a mental condition to give us a statement of the facts as you will be on tomorrow. By that time you may recollect more about the man who wished to hire the store. You may remember of having heard his name or having seen him and thereby be enabled to give a description of him. You may recollect of having heard your father say something about him or his visit. There was something else there, sir, and I do not recollect it.
Well, state any answer that she made, if she made any.
There was something there I would like to remember, sir.
Anything about time?
That was later.
Anything about whether it was some man or not?
No, sir. I think I have it. So, by that time, you may be in a better condition to relate what you know of the circumstances. To this, she made a stiff courtesy, shaking her head, and she says, "No, I can tell you all I know now just as well as at any other time."
Mr. Harrington, without characterizing, can you describe her appearance and manner during this conversation?
Wait a moment. What she did and what she said.
If the witness observes carefully the question, he may answer it.
Your Honor very properly says if he discriminates carefully, he may answer properly. The difficulty is he may give his judgment upon her state of mind from what he saw. That is the difficulty with it.
The question does not call for it, and the witness appears intelligent. Having his attention called to it, he is to do nothing but to answer the question. He may answer it.
I will ask a preliminary question. Do you understand the distinction that I intend to draw?
Well, I would like to have the question read.
The question was read.
She was cool.
Wait.
Well, that is the difficulty. By leading a little, perhaps I can get at it.
It should be stricken out. It is not a complete answer.
It is not completed because you stopped him. I suppose what he has said is an answer strictly within the rule. She was cool.
If you are content to have the answer stop there, it may stand.
I am content to have it stop there.
I am content if it stays there.
During any part of that interview, was she in tears?
No, sir.
Did she sit or stand during the talk with you?
She stood.
During any part of the interview, was there any breaking of the voice, or was it steady?
Steady.
Now, will you state anything more that was said while you were there?
I then spoke to her again about the time that she was in the barn. She said 20 minutes. I asked her, wasn't it difficult to be so accurate about fixing the time? To fix the time so accurately? Said I, may you not have been there half an hour or perhaps only 15 minutes? She says, no, sir. I was there 20 minutes.
Did that complete the conversation with her, Mr. Harrington?
I think so.
Did you notice at that time what dress she had on? What sort of dress she had on?
Yes, sir.
Would you describe it?
It was a house wrap, a striped house wrap with a pink and light stripe alternating. The pink the most prominent color. On the light ground stripe was a diamond figure formed by narrow stripes, some of which ran diagonally or biased to the stripe and others parallel to it.
It was a loose house wrapper.
Well, the sides were tailor-fitting or fitted to the form. The front from the waist to the neck was loose and in folds. The collar was standing, plaited on the sides and closely shirred in front. On either side, directly over the hips, was caught a narrow, bright red ribbon. Perhaps 3/4 of an inch or an inch in width. This was brought around front, tied in a bow, and allowed to drop, with the ends hanging a little below the bow. It was cut in semi-train or a bell skirt, which the ladies were wearing that season.
That finishes it, does it?
I think so.
Then you went where?
I went out the door, downstairs, through the front hall, passed through the sitting room into the kitchen.
When you got into the kitchen, who was there?
Well, there was quite a number of people, among whom I noticed or recognized Doctors Bowen and Dolan, Assistant Marshal Fleet, and the servant girl, whose name at the time I did not know.
Did anything occur with reference to the stove in the kitchen?
Yes, sir. Just as I went to pass by Dr. Bowen, between him and the stove, I saw some scraps of notepaper in his hand, and I asked him what they were.
You say you saw Dr. Bowen with some scraps of notepaper in his hand?
Yes, sir.
Where was he standing?
He was standing a little west of the door that led into the rear hall or entryway.
Go on and describe what was done and what you and Dr. Bowen said, not what anyone else did.
I asked him what they were, referring to the pieces of paper, and he said, "Oh, I guess it's nothing."
I cannot let this go in unless you give me an assurance that it has nothing whatever to do with it.
It has nothing to do with the case at all.
You claim the paper has no significance.
Well, he said it has no significance.
So he started to arrange them so as to determine what was on them or learn their contents. They were very small and it was rather difficult, but on one piece, on the upper left-hand corner, was the word Emma, and that was written in lead pencil as well as other pieces I saw.
Now then, what did you do with that paper?
I asked him again what they contained, and he said, "Oh, I think it's nothing. It is something I think about my daughter going through somewhere." He then turned slightly to his left and took the lid from the stove and threw the papers in, or the pieces in.
Now then, did you observe anything as he lifted the lid of the stove?
Yes, sir.
Go on and state what you did and what you observed.
I noticed the firebox. The fire was very near extinguished. On the south end, there was a small fire which I judged was a coal fire. The embers were about dying. It was about as large as the palm of my hand. There had been some paper burned in there before, which was rolled up and still held a cylindrical form.
Now will you describe that roll of burned paper by measuring it with your hands, please?
Well, I should say it was about that long. 12 inches, I should say.
And how long in diameter?
Well, not over 2 inches.
The court recessed for 5 minutes.
You had finished describing the size of the burnt paper. Could you tell anything about what sort of paper it was from the embers? If you can, say so.
I can tell the impression I have.
I don't think I will ask for that. What did you then do, Mr. Harrington?
Just about that time, Dr. Dolan came into the kitchen.
Did you have any talk with him? I don't ask you what it was.
I had a talk with him. He had 2 or 3 cans in his hands and 1 or 2 hatchets. I think 3 hatchets. He called me by name and I went to him.
I don't care for the talk.
I'm not going to tell, sir.
Very well then. Did he give you anything?
I went to him. He told me certain things and I complied with his request.
What was that? What did you do?
Stood guard over these cans.
How long did you stay there with the cans?
Perhaps 5 or 7 minutes.
Then what was done with them?
The assistant marshal gave me orders to do something else. I put the cans in his charge and left.
Did you return to the house again that day?
Yes, sir.
What time?
That I cannot say.
Whether the afternoon or...
It was in the afternoon.
What did you do after your return?
The marshal and I went there together. We entered the barn. In the barn was 2 or 3 officers. He gave orders and we set out to execute them. That was on the ground floor. When we got through there, he ordered us upstairs. We went up, I just ahead of the marshal. When we got there, officers Connors, Riley, and Doherty, I think, were the men in the barn.
What did you do in the loft of the barn?
Received further orders there. Went to work to execute them. Threw over the hay from one side or end of the barn to the other and examined it thoroughly, as I thought.
At that time, was the hay door of the barn open?
Not when we went in. It was open later.
Was it open?
Yes, sir. One of the officers opened it.
What was the temperature in the loft of the barn?
As to degrees, I cannot say, but it was extremely hot.
Did you notice anything as to dust at that time?
Yes, sir. It was very dusty, very uninviting. The floor, bench, and hay, an old-fashioned fireplace, which stood in the northwest corner of the barn, and some window screening and binding cords, things that were covered with dust.
Did you notice anything with reference to the window, whether any covering on the inside or the outside?
I think on the west window, a curtain, but about that I'm not positive.
How were the windows, opened or closed?
They were closed when we went in, covered with cobwebs, and I should say, if there was a curtain on this window, about which I am not positive, it was rolled up. because I recollect distinctly seeing the bottom of the window.
You say the windows were covered with cobwebs and clothes.
Yes, sir.
Now, can you give any other description of the atmosphere, except it was very hot?
Not until the pitching of the hay around. I noticed then it contained considerable dust. A very disagreeable breathing there.
After you began to pitch the hay around?
Yes, sir.
In addition to heat, I will ask you the direct question. Was it what's called close?
Yes, sir. Suffocating, you might say.
Was it before or after you began to pitch the hay that it was suffocating?
Yes, I noticed that it was so before we touched anything.
How long do you think you stayed in the loft of the barn?
I think I stayed there about 20 minutes or half an hour.
Were you doing these things which you described, or were you doing anything else there?
That was all, sir.
Did you see anything of a basket or a box containing anything?
I saw a basket on this table, a work table, I call it.
What did it contain?
That I don't know.
Do you know whether it was brought away at that time?
It was not, as far as I know.
Downstairs, did you notice anything with reference to any box?
No, sir. I can't say.
After you completed the work in the barn, Mr. Harrington, where did you go?
Well, I went into the house, through the kitchen, opened the dining room door, spoke to the marshal, received orders, and went down to the cellar.
Did you take anything from the cellar?
No, sir. I did not take anything.
You made some search there?
Yes, sir.
And found nothing?
Yes, sir.
What did you find?
Together with the assistant marshal and Dr. Dutra, and I think Officer Riley and Officer Mullally. About that I'm not positive now. But Dr. Dutra and the assistant marshal and I went there. Lying on the floor in what was called the washroom was an axe and 2 hatchets. Now, about that I'm not certain. I'm not positive about 1 axe and 1 hatchet, but I think 2.
Did you take them away?
No, sir. There was one I saw earlier in the day in Dr. Dolan's hands, which was not very different.
Do you recognize that as between the 2 hatchets?
I can tell which it resembled.
That one?
Yes, sir.
The claw-hammered one?
Yes, sir.
Were the others taken away at that time?
No, sir. That was missing. I went and searched for it. I found it in the west end of the house in one of the cellars, or one apartment of the cellar, on a chopping block. I took it back to the washroom. Assistant Marshal Fleet and I had some time to talk about it. He took it and brought it into the cellar north of the washroom and placed it on a shelf attached to the south partition of the room, behind a box and a keg.
Were any of these hatchets or axes taken away at the time you were in the cellar in the afternoon?
They were not.
But were left there?
Yes, sir.
Was there anything else that you discovered in the cellar?
No, sir.
Now, did you go anywhere after that?
I came upstairs and went out into the yard, met the marshal, and he gave further orders, and I proceeded to do what he ordered.
What did you do in the yard and about the premises?
I assisted in the search of the woodpile. I climbed over the fence into the Chagnon yard, went to the Chagnon house, had a talk with some people there, left there, went through the Crow yard, searched all through the underlumber and around the barn, shed, stone, left there, went through into Dr. Kelly's yard and looked there for a while. Went from there to Mrs. Crapo's, searched around there, spoke to her and what I suppose to be the servant girl, left there and went into the Fall River Ice Company's yard. There I spoke to several men, went through there up to the corner of the 3rd and Rodman Street, down Rodman to 2nd Street, and back to the Borden house.
In that search about the yard, barn, all these adjoining premises, did you find any weapon of any kind, or any marks of blood of any kind?
No, sir.
Mr. Moody completes the direct examination of Captain Harrington. The Lizzie Borden trial Day 5 featured Christine Daniels as George Robinson, Matt Campbell as John Fleet, Keith Morrison as William H. Moody, Robin McKittrick as Philip Harrington, Kevin Morrison as Chief Justice Mason. This production was produced by Lion's Den Audio Theatre. Subscribe to Lion's Den Audio Theatre on YouTube to receive notifications of upcoming audio releases. I'm your Day 5 announcer, Ron Newcombe, and from everyone at Lion's Den Audio, stay healthy, stay happy, and stay safe.